Michael Anthony was never the one to speak out. Through decades of fame and silence, he stayed loyal to the band that shaped his life, and to the man who once called him a brother. As the world celebrated Eddie Van Halen's genius, Michael stayed in the background, carrying memories that few ever asked him to share. Now, as he looks back at 70, the story that unfolds is not about anger. It's about what loyalty costs when it's given to the wrong people for too long. Michael Anthony Sobolewski was born on June 20th, 1954, in Chicago, Illinois, before his family moved to California. Music was always there. His father played trumpet in small local bands, and Michael learned rhythm before he even picked up an instrument. He started on the trumpet too, but rock and roll soon pulled him in. Everyone around him wanted to be a guitarist or a drummer, but Michael wanted something that felt more solid. "I wanted to be different," he said later. So he picked up the bass, the instrument that quietly holds everything together. By 1973, Michael was playing in Pasadena clubs with a band called Snake. Around that time, two brothers, Eddie and Alex Van Halen, were building their own reputation with a local band named Mammoth. They were loud, ambitious, and fiercely determined. One night, both bands played the same high school gig. Mammoth's PA system broke down just before their set, and Michael stepped in, lending them his equipment. "It was just the decent thing to do," he later said. A few weeks later, Mammoth's bassist left the band. Eddie and Alex remembered the guy who helped them when they needed it. They called Michael in for a jam session, and the chemistry was instant. His steady bass, his high harmonies, his calm energy, it all fit. Soon after, they renamed the band Van Halen. In 1978, Van Halen released their debut album, and the world changed overnight. "Runnin' with the Devil," "Ain't Talkin' About Love," "Eruption." These weren't just songs. They were statements. Eddie's guitar playing became the center of rock culture, but Michael's harmonies and groove were the glue that made it all work. Former manager Noel Monk once said, "Eddie couldn't have flown as high as he did without the foundation Michael gave him." Michael didn't seek the spotlight. He showed up, played hard, and believed in the brotherhood. The band's early years were wild, constant touring, endless laughter, and nights that blurred into mornings. "Those early days were pure," Michael later said. "It wasn't about fame. It was just about the music." But beneath the noise, cracks were forming. Eddie and Alex often made decisions privately. David Lee Roth's ego clashed with everyone's. Michael became the peacemaker, the one trying to keep the band from falling apart. It worked for a while. By 1984, Van Halen ruled the world. 1984 was everywhere. Jump, Panama, Hot for Teacher. The crowds were huge, the money even bigger. But success has a way of changing people. The brothers started treating the band less like a family and more like a corporation. Eddie wanted control. Roth wanted attention. Michael just wanted to play. In the middle of the 1984 tour, Michael was called backstage before a show. Eddie, Alex, Roth, and manager Noel Monk were waiting. They handed him a stack of papers. "New contracts," they said. There was no lawyer, no discussion. He didn't even know what the meeting was about until he was standing in the room. The new deal stripped him of songwriting credits and cut his royalties down to a fraction of what they had been, even for songs already released. The harmonies that made Van Halen's sound unique, the bass that carried Eddie's guitar, all of it would now go unrewarded. Michael was stunned. "It was right before a show," he recalled years later. "They said either sign it or the tour doesn't go on. The fans were out there. I didn't want to be the reason the show got canceled." That night, Michael Anthony became the quiet casualty of Van Halen's success. He lost millions of dollars, and more painfully, the sense of brotherhood he thought would last forever. "I did it for the fans," he said later, but it was like the air had changed around me. I was still in the band, but I wasn't really part of it anymore. Manager Noel Monk later wrote in Running with the Devil that what happened to Michael was one of the most ruthless moves I'd ever seen in rock. He remembered how Michael said nothing, didn't argue, didn't storm out. He just went on stage and played the show of his life. But you could tell something inside him had shifted, Monk said. After that tour, things were different. The laughter and easy friendship that once defined Van Halen started to disappear. When David Lee Roth left in 1985, the headlines called it shocking. For Michael, the real break had already happened a year earlier. When Sammy Hagar joined, it looked like a new beginning. The band had a new voice, a cleaner energy. For a moment, Michael thought they might find their balance again. The 1986 album 5150 was a massive success, melodic, emotional, filled with warmth. Songs like Dreams and Love Walks In gave the band a softer edge, and Michael's harmonies made them shine. On stage, his chemistry with Sammy became one of the highlights of the show. But the old hierarchy never went away. Eddie and Alex kept control of every decision. Sammy would fight back when he disagreed. Michael stayed quiet. He had seen too many battles and didn't want another one. During one recording session, Eddie told him, "Don't worry about the bass. I'll handle it." It hit harder than any argument. For years, Michael had been the band's foundation. Now, Eddie didn't even want him to play. On some albums, including parts of For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge, 1991, Eddie recorded the bass himself. Michael showed up anyway. He played what he was asked to play, stayed out of fights, and tried to keep the peace. "I always tried to be the guy that held everyone together," he said, even when it felt like nobody really wanted that anymore. By the early 1990s, Van Halen was everywhere. OU 812 went multi-platinum. For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge won a Grammy, and their tours filled stadiums. But the feeling had changed. Eddie's drinking was getting worse. Alex wasn't far behind, and sessions dragged for hours before anyone played a note. Michael spent a lot of time waiting for the brothers to show up, waiting for things to feel normal again. Sammy Hagar later said that Michael was the buffer in the group, the one who calmed things down when Eddie exploded or when Alex got defensive. But being the peacekeeper was exhausting. Michael could feel his friendship with Eddie slipping away. "We stopped hanging out after the shows," he said. "No bar nights, no jamming at home, just the gig, then silence." He stayed anyway, maybe out of hope, maybe out of habit. Part of him believed that if he just kept showing up, they'd remember what they'd built together, not just the music, the friendship, the kid who lent them his PA system when they had nothing. But by the mid-1990s, that hope was gone. Eddie's addiction deepened, and his circle grew smaller. Trust became suspicion. Even Michael, the one who never betrayed him, started to feel like an outsider. When Sammy Hagar left in 1996, it all fell apart. The reunion with David Lee Roth collapsed almost immediately, and the band went silent. Eddie's drinking took over, his temper sharper than ever. Michael, who had spent 20 years standing to Eddie's left on stage, was suddenly standing outside altogether. There were no rehearsals, no calls, no explanation. He wasn't officially fired, just quietly left out. When Van Halen disappeared from the public eye, Michael waited. Weeks became months. Months became years. "I kept thinking maybe we'd talk again. Maybe clear the air," he said. But the phone never rang. It wasn't until 2004, 8 years after their last tour, that his hopes were briefly revived. Sammy Hagar had reconnected with Eddie, and they decided to reform the band for a reunion tour. When Sammy called Michael, he was overjoyed. It felt like a second chance, a bridge back to the brotherhood that had been lost. But what he didn't know was that Eddie had already rewritten the terms, literally and emotionally. When the tour contract arrived, Michael was stunned to find his share slashed to almost nothing. He was told he would be a hired musician, not a partner. The man who had co-founded Van Halen, who had sung on every hit and stood on every stage, was now being paid as a sideman in the band he helped build. Still, he agreed. "I did it for the fans," he said quietly. "I didn't want people to see their favorite band without the real lineup. I thought, maybe if I just play, things could heal." But the tour was a nightmare. Eddie's drinking had returned with vengeance. Shows were erratic. One night brilliant, the next a disaster. Sammy later recalled that Eddie's behavior was painful to watch. He barely spoke to Michael off stage. Some nights he refused to look at him at all. Michael described it as like playing next to a ghost of my best friend. When the tour ended, the silence returned. Only this time, it was permanent. In 2006, Michael learned from the press, not from Eddie, that Van Halen would be reforming again, this time with David Lee Roth, and that he would not be part of it. His replacement? Eddie's teenage son, Wolfgang Van Halen. For Michael, it was not just a professional wound, it was deeply personal. "That's when I knew it was really over," he said. "Not just the band. The friendship. The family." He never blamed Wolfgang, always speaking kindly of him. But being replaced by Eddie's own child made the rejection feel final, like a message that blood would always matter more than loyalty. Years later, he admitted that the phone call never came. Eddie never explained, never apologized, never even said goodbye. "It's like one day we were brothers," Michael reflected, "and the next day, I was erased." The man who once shared laughter, long nights, and stage dreams with Eddie Van Halen now carried only silence, the kind that echoes louder than applause. He didn't fight back. He didn't give interviews filled with anger. He simply disappeared from the Van Halen story, watching from afar as the band toured again, this time without him. For Michael Anthony, exile wasn't a moment. It was a slow, aching fade-out. The kind of ending that doesn't make headlines, but lingers quietly, year after year, in the space where friendship used to live. After the 2004 reunion collapsed, the silence between Michael Anthony and Eddie Van Halen became absolute. They didn't call, didn't meet, didn't even exchange messages. Years passed, and Van Halen moved on without him. The band toured again, this time with Wolfgang on bass, a young man with his father's talent and fire. From the outside, it looked like a new beginning for Eddie. But to Michael, it felt like the final chapter of something sacred that had once meant everything. Still, he never spoke ill of them. "It wasn't my place," he would say in interviews. "Eddie was dealing with a lot, and I didn't want to add to that." While Eddie was battling his demons, substance abuse, personal turmoil, and a long, quiet fight with cancer, Michael stayed away, not out of resentment, but out of respect. "Sometimes," he said, "you love people enough to let them go." He poured his energy into other projects, the band Chickenfoot with Sammy Hagar, and later The Circle. Fans often asked if he missed Van Halen, and his answers were always the same, honest, but never bitter. "I miss the early days," he'd say. "The laughter, the music, the friendship. That's what I hold on to." Behind the calm words, though, there was still sadness, a sense that a part of him had been left unfinished. Then came 2020. When news broke that Eddie Van Halen had died on October 6th, after a long battle with cancer, the world froze. The rock community mourned. Fans gathered outside 5150 studios, and tributes poured in from every corner of the globe. For Michael Anthony, the loss hit deeper than words could reach. He later said he found out the same way most people did, through the news. There had been no final phone call, no last conversation. I hadn't talked to Eddie for years, he admitted softly. And then suddenly, he was gone. During a later interview, when asked how he felt that day, Michael's composure finally cracked. "You know," he said, voice breaking, "we had our differences. But there was a time when we were brothers. And you can't just erase that." His eyes filled with tears as he spoke about their early days, the long nights in Pasadena, the excitement of their first tour, the way Eddie would laugh uncontrollably when a riff came out right. "Those are the memories I keep," he said. "Not the bad stuff. Not the fighting. Just the music." In the months after Eddie's death, something unexpected happened. Wolfgang Van Halen reached out. He had heard how respectfully Michael had spoken about his father, and he wanted to thank him. The two talked privately, sharing memories, laughter, and grief. "Wolf's a great kid," Michael said later. "He's got his father's spirit." Talking to him, it helped me find peace. There was no dramatic reunion, no public spectacle, just two musicians connected by love for the same man. Through Wolfgang, Michael found a quiet form of closure. "It's like part of Eddie still lives on through him," he said, "and I'm grateful for that." Looking back, Michael never once framed himself as a victim. His voice, even now, carries no bitterness, only acceptance. "We had magic," he said. "For a while it was perfect, and sometimes that has to be enough." For Michael Anthony, forgiveness didn't come through words, but through understanding. He learned that some friendships aren't meant to last forever, yet their echoes never fade. And as he turned 70, when asked what he would say to Eddie if he could, he pauses for a long moment, eyes glistening. "I'd say thank you," he whispers, "for everything." After Eddie's passing, life slowly found a new rhythm for Michael Anthony. He continued touring with Sammy Hagar and The Circle, still playing the old Van Halen songs that had defined his youth. Every night, when he stepped on stage and felt the vibration of the bass through his chest, a quiet thought would cross his mind. Somewhere, somehow, Eddie was still listening. "I feel him every time I play," he said during a 2023 interview. "It's like we're still talking through the music." The bitterness that had once surrounded their breakup no longer mattered. Time had done what words never could. It softened the sharp edges. Michael didn't need public apologies or rewritten history. What mattered was that the music they made together still lived on, still moved people, still made strangers smile decades later. "That's the real legacy," he said. "Not the fights, not the contracts. It's the sound. That sound we built together." Sometimes, after a show, fans would approach him with tears in their eyes, thanking him for the songs that carried them through their own difficult times. In those moments, Michael understood the strange, full-circle beauty of it all, that out of heartbreak and broken friendships, something eternal had emerged. "That's the thing about music," he said. "It doesn't die with the people who made it. It keeps breathing through everyone who listens." At 70, he no longer looks back with anger or regret. When asked if he wishes he and Eddie had reconciled before it was too late, his answer is simple and calm. We did, in our own way. Through the music, through Wolf, through the memories. He doesn't need closure anymore. What he carries instead is gratitude for the years of laughter, the wild nights on tour, the unforgettable bond of four young men who once believed they could conquer the world. And for a moment, they did. Now, as he walks off stage to the sound of applause, Michael smiles softly to himself. "This," he says quietly, "this is how I talk to him now." Because in every note, every chord, every song that echoes from his bass, there's still a trace of Eddie, the brother, the rival, the genius, who helped shape not only his music, but his life. Their story didn't end with forgiveness or apology. It ended with music, the only language they ever truly shared. Sometimes, friendships fall apart. Sometimes pride and pain get in the way of saying the words that matter most. But as Michael Anthony's story reminds us, love, respect, and brotherhood can still live on through the memories we leave behind. Do you think Michael and Eddie ever found peace through their music, even without speaking again? Share your thoughts below. And if you love stories that reveal the truth behind rock's greatest legends, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for the next one.